Hey everybody, what's going on? I'm DJ Sixsmith. Welcome to Sit Down. Jed Rothstein is here with us. WeWork, or the making and breaking of a $47 billion unicorn, brand new documentary coming to Hulu. Jed, really nice to meet you. How are you?
Nice to meet you too, DJ. Thanks for having me.
So I think a lot of people who are going to watch this know about WeWork, have been to WeWork, know a little bit about the story, know who Adam Neumman is, but I don't think they know the full breadth of the story. So what was it like diving into this and really finding out just all the fascinating twists and turns?
Well, the story was always something I was interested in. I followed it when it was in the news in late 2019. And when we started making it, it was really the beginning of the pandemic. So it was very interesting to dive into this. It was almost like a fable from the time before, or a fable from another land, when you could still talk about making billions of dollars by bringing a lot of people together in offices and having endless parties. And so it was very, in a strange way, it was like going to another galaxy making this story. And it was something that I was very happy and lucky to have the ability to dive into over the last year.
It also reminds you of what New York City used to be, right? In terms of the real estate market, in terms of people coming together and working, in terms of just trying
Yeah.
to come up with the next billion-dollar idea. So, what was it like to just look back on a time that's not that long ago, but feels like it was a long time ago?
Well, I look back on it. I'm a New Yorker. I've lived through all of this. I look back on it and think about how the excitement and energy that someone like Adam was trying to harness. I mean, there's Adam kind of comes in this great tradition of people coming to New York and hustling and trying to make a go of it with in any way they can. And I think that's the part of his story that draws a lot of people in, because a lot of people can relate to it. Um, when it later turns bad, you also understand that there's this sort of dark side of the hustle in New York too. There's sort of the aspirational side of it, and then there's the side of it where a lot of people can be left out and left behind when things don't work.
And for Adam Newman too, there's so many different interesting wrinkles to his story. But you mentioned in the documentary, his charisma just comes across in such a strong way that people gravitate towards him. They don't realize the BS, they don't realize the platitudes. They want to be involved with this guy. So, what was it like just learning about his story, and what's most fascinating about him just as a person?
Adam is someone who moved a lot as a child. He says he moved 13 times. And I learned that about him pretty early on in the process. And to me, that was very intriguing, because I thought, well, having known people like that myself growing up, either they sort of retreat, um, become more insular or bookish, or they become very extroverted. And in Adam's case, he became a great salesman. Imagine having to introduce yourself over and over in new schools. I mean, it's not easy to do. So I think part of what I found with Adam was that by creating WeWork, he was in a sense creating this community out of the global nomad world that sort of gave a home to him and his life experience. I mean, you can take that with a grain of salt. I guess it's amateur psychology, but I did feel like the um, entire spirit of WeWork kind of grew out of, in some ways, Adam's own, or at least partly out of Adam's own desire to sort of build a community where he didn't have one.
I definitely agree with you on that. And just also the need for community, especially in a pandemic right now. People are
Yeah,
working at home, they're not seeing people, right? It really hits on this lonely society because whether it's people wanting to work together, people wanting to live together, there was a need for that. And it definitely hit on something. So, why do you think
totally.
this company did thrive in the moment when first things got going here?
I think they addressed a real need that existed among young people trying to start businesses or working in small companies, who felt dislocated from the normal bonds that held our society together. When you used to go and, and this is before my time or probably your time, but you'd go and you'd work in one place for a long, long time. You'd have these casual relationships, friendships with people in your workplace. And I think a lot of that was gone by the time WeWork started. And they were addressing a real need, both in a practical sense for people to have easy places to have short-term office rentals, but also in a deeper sort of spiritual, emotional sense, where people wanted to get together. I think that was very attractive to a lot of the young, often millennial workers went to work at WeWork and people who signed up to become members of WeWork. And I think that for them, the experience of joining this project was in many ways enriching, and they were becoming part of something greater than themselves. I think their stories, which are included in the film, to me are what give it its heart. And when at the end things don't work out, and when Adam sort of chooses the me over the we really see the sense of betrayal that some of them had. But their experience of the buildup of that was quite real.
The spiritual element to it is really fascinating because it's cult-like in a sense, right? But when you're in it, you don't necessarily realize that. So you go into some of these things where it's like, we're talking about the summer camp, we're talking about living here, we're talking about one thing if it's ubiquitous, it's another thing if it's taking over your entire life. So what was it like just to parse through that? Because it's one thing if like Apple and Amazon and Facebook are changing the world, but it seemed like WeWork just wanted to change the way that we lived. So how did you kind of look through both those things there?
Well, they definitely offered the possibility that they wanted to change the world. And I think people who participated in it felt like they were changing the world. They were changing the way that they worked and that people worked and lived. There was another film that came out recently where somebody said, nobody ever joins a cult. You join something because you think it's good, and then it kind of becomes this other thing. And I think with WeWork, that's very true. One of the moving stories in the film is of a young man who joins We Live, which is they expanded out of just having working space to having actually co-living spaces. And he joined it, and it was kind of like being in this post-collegiate dorm. And it was fun, and everybody partied all the time. And at a certain point, he began to realize that his friends from outside of the We Live community would come and visit him, and they'd only come once, and they'd leave, and they'd say, like, this is kind of weird. You guys are all, this are a little too familiar with one another. And towards the end of it, he realized he was kind of losing himself in the we world, which, is disturbing. But I think when he first got into it, it just seemed like getting into a fantastic club that you really wanted to be part of. And that's the sort of the strange prismatic nature of WeWork and of Adam. You can look at it in one way and it looks like a fantastic thing to join up with, and you can look at it through another way and it seems like maybe it's something else, and it has a darker side to it.
You can look at it as a real estate company. They tried to call it a tech company. And then you bring Rebecca Neumman into the fold, and she looks at it as just a wholesale, spiritual, comprehensively life-changing company. So when you think about her role in all this, what intrigues you the most about Rebecca?
Well, I think Rebecca gave Adam his gravitas. Adam was a guy who wanted to hustle. His motto was sort of hustle harder. He wanted to hustle and make it any way he could. And he first started trying to sell baby clothes even before he had any kids or knew anything about what babies should wear. He tried selling women's shoes that had removable heels. That didn't work. So WeWork is the first thing he hit on that actually, got some traction. But I think it wasn't until Rebecca came along that the goopy yoga babble side of the company began to take shape. And eventually, in some ways, it sort of overtook the whole fundamental idea of the company. And all of a sudden they were selling a school, We Grow, and they were selling We Live, and they had a gym called Rise by We. And it wasn't just about having a good place to work or even having a nice community of people with whom you could get a beer in the common area after work, but it became this entire program and way to live. And I think that's when they began to sort of drink a little too much of their own Kool-Aid, and the reality of what they were doing drifted away from the sort of business fundamentals, and eventually that tether snapped. But I think Rebecca was really the force that helped inject a lot of that sensation, that spirituality into Adam's rhetoric and into what the company became.
And it's interesting because then they start playing with their own rules. It's like, we're going to decide if we're profitable. We're going to call a latte a cappuccino, the other way around, right? They're doing their own thing here. And then, when I'm thinking about it, I'm wondering myself, what's more surprising? Is it the fact that it became valued at $47 billion, or that it really all came crashing down in 6 weeks? When you think about that, which way do you go?
I think the question I ask is less of like, what did Adam do wrong or what did we do wrong? And more when I think about why does the system that we live in keep building up people like Adam and keep building up overhyped companies like WeWork. And I think it's partly because we want to invest in superheroes. We want to invest in people who are these sort of salvific figures who can come up with a new way of doing things and take us all out of the mundane problems that we face. And I think there's something that's not there's a kind of good instinct, or there's a kind of noble urge in that. But I think what we see with the WeWork story and other stories like it is when we let that take over and we lose the ability to ask, the basic questions like, wait, is this really a tech company? Why is it worth $47 billion? Isn't what you're doing just renting desks? When we get too scared or too excited about something to ask these basic questions, that's when the vision side of something gets away from us, and the sort of common sense side is overlooked. And I hope that coming out of this story, it's not that we shouldn't support big visions and big dreams. It's that we should never let them float off into this world of hype where we don't even ask any questions, because people must be so marvelous and ideas must be so marvelous that you're going to look stupid for asking questions. One of my mentors always reminds me, ask the dumb question. If something doesn't make sense to you, like how does this make money, or why is it worth $47 billion? Those are the questions to ask. And if people don't have pretty good answers for them, it's usually indicative of a really big problem.
What you see is not always what you get, and that certainly applies to this case here. And I think in this moment right now, we're really rethinking how we're going to live going forward. And I guess one of the questions is, do you see people going back to a WeWork office now that we've become accustomed to working from home?
Oh yeah, I bet that either WeWork or some other co-working companies, and there are a number of them now, will be extremely well positioned when we emerge from the pandemic. As we rethink how we live and work, I think a lot of the ideas that they pioneered or certainly scaled up in an incredible way are gonna really pay off. Big companies especially, my hunch is that big companies will want to reduce their footprint and they'll want more flexible space. And you could easily see, here in New York, you could easily see big financial firms saying, what, we don't need a 20-year lease on 200,000 square feet in one building in Midtown. What we do need is 20,000 square feet here for the headquarters and a couple of satellites with more flexible things where people can go, that it's more convenient to them. And if it turns out we don't need it next year, we just turn the key off. I think those sorts of arrangements will actually be increasingly popular, and probably there'll be something that make our work lives better. That's what really the heart of the film for me, is something that Alex Conrad says in the end of the film, which is the reason that Adam's story resonates so much is because he was so close. He was on to something that had a lot of good qualities, and then he kind of messed it up, or he got out over his skis, or he got greedy, or the system of venture capital that demands these huge returns, or our whole superhero system just blew the whole thing up and it didn't work. But the fact that it was close is what really it's what hurts when you hear the stories of the people who went along on the ride with him. And it hurts us all when we think about this system that we have. We want to encourage these innovations, and we just want to do it in a way that's maybe fairer and that can work. And I hope that some of the ideas that they put forward, or a good number of them, are refined and carry on in the future.
I think so that's what makes this film so interesting, and the company itself just so fascinating. And Jed, really appreciate the time, man. Thank you so much for making the film, and best luck with everything going forward, right?
Thank you very much, DJ. Have a good one.